Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets got right back on track, taking care of the Orlando Magic, and it also came with a helping of Mikal Bridges, an excellent performance for him, and a sample size of the new look lineup with Cam Thomas and why we know this is what the Brooklyn Nets roster will be going forward. We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marmbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Doug, the nightmare landscape that was losing to the Hornets, rearview mirror. I don't even know if it happened, as the Nets got a big victory over the Magic. And as I said at the top, really behind the efforts of Mikal Bridges. This was a twofer. Get the win, get back on track, and have your lead player really shine.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that it's never as dark as it seems. It's never as bright as it seems. The truth is always somewhere in the middle, and why evaluating things after a game, especially a devastating loss, is not usually the best time to go in and make whole cloth statements about a team, because then sometimes you just get Mikal Bridges, who comes out there and basically outscores the entire other team for a short stretch for a stretch. I mean, outscored him for the whole first quarter in Saturday's game, and then goes on to finish with 42 points. 12 of 20 shooting, 15 for 18 from the floor, 75% true shooting. I mean, just one of his very best games as a Brooklyn Net, which is really saying something considering the run that he went on following the trade deadline last year. And just a reminder, hey, things can just turn back in your favor pretty quickly, especially when the team is talented. We've seen the team through 19 games now have stretches where they can definitely put it all together. There's been some rough moments along the way, but they might be starting to figure things out here, especially around the lineups. And when you just get this kind of performance from Mikal, you're feeling like you have to win, but also when everything else is kind of coming together, then it feels even better, because he had one of these games against, I think it was, Atlanta, that OT one, where he had sort of a similar game and they didn't win. It's nice to have him go nuke, and also for them to be able to take home the W.
Yeah, and I think you and I have talked about it. You say, from a high level, and this is why I didn't show up for that Hornets post game. I'm not. Listen, I come in for the good times. I'm not here for the bad.
Course, man.
I leave Doug
front run with the best of them, and I appreciate that. Let's just out in front, but when things are bad, take a step back. Maybe do a little inward searching around what you want to do and what you want to be. And when they win again, let's get right back into the.
Here I am. I show up every time when it values me. No, you come off a game like that and you say you want to get the win, and frankly, the Orlando Magic, we may have looked at them differently at the start of the year, thought they were going to be a better team, but even just from a record standpoint, you say, oh, okay, you do count this win as being a little bit more valuable than you would have first perceived it. Combine that with Mikal Bridges. Listen, we talked about whether it was coming off of FIBA or you're trying to get the injuries to the rest of the roster certainly can impact him. Is he truly an elite number one guy? Does this one game change that perception? No, not really. But it changes the idea of what he can be for this team and how he can take over quarters and how he can set a tone. Maybe I looked at it mostly from that standpoint. You're coming off a bad loss that you felt like you should have had. You fell back to 500. If Mikal is the leader and the face of this version of the Brooklyn Nets, then he needs to be one of the guys that steps up, right? We again would look at it more critically if he came in and was kind of a quiet night, and especially if they had lost that game. So I think it's important for a player like him to be the catalyst for this victory. And he did it in some of the standard ways. And it feels like his season has taken longer maybe to get its legs underneath it. But we have seen more often these type of games of late than we did over the first couple of weeks of the year.
Yeah, the efficiency is a bit below where it was last season with Brooklyn, which was, the best, pretty much the best of his career at volume, right? So I think, backing off a little bit of efficiency stuff wouldn't have been too crazy. I think that overall, sometimes the disappointment, maybe that's the wrong word. things are only relative to expectations, right? When you think the graph on improvement is going to be linear, a guy is going to make this one leap in the Brooklyn and he's going to make this next leap into this next stratosphere. That's not always the case, and that's fine. Like, it doesn't need to be that way. This game was a reminder that he has that gear in him for sure, right? Like, he has the gear that can get up to 40 plus points a game on the nights where it's working. I think we've seen him get very aggressive too, like getting downhill a lot more. I think a lot more this season, like trying to get to the rim over and over. Sometimes it hasn't been perfect, but I like the effort is definitely there because it's going to keep the defense on its toes. And, we already know he, from like the mid-range game, he's really can be hyper efficient there, especially when he gets into the right matchup. So it's nice to just lodge these reminders too. And also I think that this team, like, one difference from last year to this year, maybe it's a Cam Thomas thing, and maybe it's just like the other guys like Lonnie Walker, and maybe Dinwiddie's play, I think, has been pretty consistent here, is that I think last year there was a feeling of, they kind of need him to do it all. And it was super exciting at the same time, right? It's like, hey, we need you to be all the scoring. There's like literally nothing on the bench. It's just going to be kind of you. Hopefully you can go out and take all the shots and make them. And that they definitely needed him to do that. And it was like, hey, you just came over for Durant. We got this. There's expectations tied to this. Like, there's a bunch of other things. I think now the team is just different to the point where they don't need him to do everything actually as much this year. And so sometimes, like, taking a back seat, it would have looked way worse last year to take a back seat. Like, this year, taking a back seat is like, hey, sometimes we get a Cam Thomas night. Sometimes it's a Dinwiddie night. We got Lonnie Walker. We got guys off the bench that can really ball. Like, he doesn't actually need to do as much this year. And I think that that's probably part of what's playing in here as well.
And the other thing is too, remember last year for all those great performances, what were the expectations? Right after the trades, it was just, well, we want to see these guys play well, and we hope that we think about something that this team could be. But playoffs or not, that was kind of all a wash. Coming into this year, the organization said we want to be competitive. We want to make the playoffs again. So he's a part of that. And I agree, this can be a baton handing off kind of season, game over game. But you need Mikal to every once in a while pop up and give you a game like this. Coming up here in 1 second, though, we're also going to talk about that new lineup, something that Doug and I discussed a couple of episodes ago, came to fruition, and basically there's no looking back as Cam Thomas gets into the starting unit. We'll go ahead and dive in on that angle coming up here in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Jase Medical. We come to sports to escape some of the craziness realities of real life. Let's talk about a little bit for a second here about preparing for real life. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle. Some of the worst flu season we've ever had in over a decade. It can be pretty scary when you kind of consider the prospects around this. Can't imagine a more helpless feeling than me or my family or one of my kids getting sick while a supply chain issue kept them from life-saving medication they needed. In the past, by the way, just as a point of reference, I've had this happen to me where we've been in another country and my kid was sick and needed antibiotics, and it was not the easiest thing to get to. This is where we needed Jase Medical. Thankfully, everyone can just be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff can happen to any of us. Visit jasemedical.com. Complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Go to jasemedical.com. Use offer code LOCKEDON. Get $20 off your order.
All right, so as we continue, a bit of a belated post-game episode, as we've normally been coming in over on YouTube, doing the live post-games. But listen, sometimes life gets in the way, and we're just happy that we were able to go ahead and round back in on this one. The next part of this equation, Doug, after Mikal Bridges, is Cam Thomas. Now, the Nets get, let's understand the frame of reference here, a little bit lucky with a Dorian Finney-Smith injury, which was a lot of what we discussed about what's the right combination, who comes in, who comes out. And by the way, this has been the Nets theme for the start of this year. Well, don't worry. It sorts itself out in the background. Cam Thomas is in the starting unit.
It's hilarious.
Go ahead. Yeah, no.
Well, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm just agreeing with you. I'm like, it's so hilarious how this has worked out for Vaughn. Like, he's been able to avoid every.
What are we going to do? Oh, just wait.
It's just wait, something will happen and we'll be able to do it. No, so, and for those that are just coming new to the pod, so we've been talking about this for a little while. It's like sort of what to do when Cam Thomas returns because they have some hard decisions. That starting lineup of Dinwiddie, Mikal, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Claxton had been, it's like, I looked it up the other day. It was actually the 5th best net rating lineup in all of the NBA. after like Philly, Boston, and a Sacramento lineup and one other one. I mean, like really good over 90 minutes too. Like that lineup had been good. Like there's a real statistical case to keep that lineup as your starting five. So Cam Thomas is coming back, and we're laughing. We're like, well, what's Jacque Vaughn going to do? Because it feels like he never wants to start him, but he kind of always has been forced into it because of this other stuff. And then comes back, has the minutes restriction in the first game, doesn't close with him, which we were pretty critical of, right? Or I was critical after the game of just being like, you have to manage the minutes better. He has to be out there closing.
I was critical too. I just wasn't on the podcast.
I totally ridiculous. So
then,
but going to this one, it's like, oh, what do I do? Bam, Dorian Finney-Smith can't play. Now you get a lineup, which, by the way, that lineup replacing Cam Thomas or Dorian Finney-Smith with Cam Thomas, that lineup never played together. That 5-man lineup that started the other day, that was their first minutes. And skip to the ending here, it works. And now I actually think that Vaughn was done another huge favor here, which is now, hopefully, there will be no more, you won't have to wring hands around what to do because that lineup went out, totally crushed the Magic. Got some scheduling help there. Magic on the back-to-back with the travel, whatever. Crushed the Magic. Cam wasn't that good, but a little bit different stuff in his game. I think Vaughn was now probably given the green light to say that's just the starting lineup going forward, right? Like, I think it could not have worked out more perfectly to not have to make a tough decision. And I think, once again, it won't have to be the tough decision and will be the decision that makes fans happy.
Yeah, right. The old free twofer here, where you didn't have to do the hard work of making the tough call, and everyone goes, fantastic. Love the work that you're doing on the bench there, Jacque Vaughn. Right? Yeah. Now, the other thing about this is too, just quickly on, remember, Dorian Finney-Smith was getting to the starting lineup because of the injury to Cameron Johnson originally. Then it's the Ben Simmons goes out, so then you keep him in there even when Cam Johnson returns. And I think that's the other nice part about this for Jacque Vaughn is that it's not Dorian Finney-Smith, though last year we talked about that starting 5-man lineup as you referenced being one of the best. He was not a starter coming into this year. As a byproduct of all the injuries, he gets thrust into it. Now, he was very good, and the size and the length, and then losing Ben Simmons and the defensive component. There's all of these threads you can pull on. But the beauty of this is Cam Thomas comes in early this year, looks excellent, looks like he's ready to ascend, goes down for a few games with the injury. And you mentioned it, comes back in here. And I think this is the reason why you can go continuing forward with this. The box score for Cam Thomas, just 7 of 23, not perfect. Oddly enough, bit of a big three-point shooting night, 4 for 9, something they hadn't been doing a ton of early in this season. But it's really about the 7 rebounds and the 5 assists. This has been the thing that you and I have continued to drill down on with him. He's an electric scorer. He's an ISO guy. He can get you buckets. But if that's the only function you have to your game right now, it is going to pale by comparison to, say, a 3-and-D Dorian Finney-Smith, right? Or a facilitating Spencer Dinwiddie. It's not about who you think should be, but just complementary basketball. If you're going to start giving out some assists, if you're going to start playing a little more of that team energy, then you can look at this game as a sample size that says, yeah, let's carry this forward and see if Thomas can build off of this when you have other big performances like that from Mikal.
Look, the 5 assists was the second most of his entire career. Now he got help with some minutes here, but 6 assists was his most that he's ever had in his first 3 years in the NBA, which is crazy to think about. But the guy's one of the lower assists to minutes guys in all the league now, and definitely one of the lowest ratio of points to assists. Right, that kind of classic shooting guard stuff. Right, it's really now it's typically what you see more out of, like in the past you would see it from Klay Thompson or Bradley Beal, guys like this that were just sort of spot up. Now Beal before he became like the point guard. Got other guys like this, or like Gary Harris or Gary Trent, right? These classic shooting guard types that would score, but they would never have assists. Cam was a little different. He was a high volume shooter with no assists. That is actually not that common in the NBA, just because to shoot that much means you have the ball in your hands a lot. And like by accident, you'll happen and do assists, right? Like just like the ball, like just a guy will be wide open. You can't help but assist. Like Cam really hadn't done that at all. To see this part, even just for one game, and he talked about this, even like the Old Man in the 3 podcast, like he's talked about like he needs to have this as part of his game, this in defense. I think that like this is probably going to be a little sticky. And with this particular lineup, it's pretty crucial that they do it. Like he has to be a read and react distributor. If he gets blitzed a little, like he has to be able to get, catch Claxton in the roll, stuff like that. If he's able to do that at a more consistent level, it is actually kind of game over on his game. Like that's the only piece missing on the offensive end. If he can be like a high pick and roll where there's a threat for a lob, a threat for a pass, like then defenses are going to have a totally impossible time with it. I'm really hoping that's the case, because when we talked about this possibility of this lineup being the starters, the team that started last night, our concern was I was like, they'll probably be able to score. They'll definitely be able to score. I think we knew that. Are they going to be able to maintain on the rebounds? I mean, that they crushed the Magic on the glass last night. That might be, that might be a little luck. And are they going to be able to have a little, not a total my turn, your turn offense between Bridges and Cam Thomas?
Right.
And if that's going to be the case, then this offense is actually just good. Like this 5-man unit can be a really, really good offense, and their flaws will kind of take a back seat to like how good the offense can be.
Yeah, just you mentioned there about in this lineup, you can't be Cam Thomas with this much quality shooting. Cameron Johnson, Mikal Bridges, Spencer Dinwiddie. You can't play on the floor in a lineup like this and not get them the ball, right? Like it would just be to the detriment of the team overall. So that's why this is a good sample size. And then you just mentioned about enough. We know whatever Cam is or is not on the defensive end, although we've said he's made some marginal improvements on that end as well. Went from being an absolute Patty Mills to being a little bit of a speed bump and using some of his size and being some resistance there. But
definitely more active. Like he's been clearly more active. Effort is a lot for a guy like him, honestly. And if the effort's there, that goes a long, long way. Sorry to interrupt, but I just
because that's a decision, right? It's a decision to give the high effort on the defensive end. We saw this from a guy like, again, these are not comparisons, but Kyrie Irving. When Kyrie Irving wanted to dial up the defensive effort, all of a sudden you go, oh yeah, this guy can really impact you, right? Yes. And then that's all it comes down to. But offensively, if you want to stay on the court for 38 minutes in a game like this, that's what it comes down to. Can you read and react and make the right basketball play? And whether or not you agree with how long it took to get Cam Thomas to this place, this is what Jacques Vaughn talked about last year. He talked about in the offseason as well. There are fundamental things that he wanted to see, not just from Thomas, from every player. And if you get a game like this and then you carry it over, like there's a world where you'd say, hey, if you're going to play every time you play 38 minutes, every time you play 34 minutes, you need to be a guy that's given us at least 4 assists, because that is a byproduct of the gravity of what your offensive game is by itself. So as long as he does that, then all of a sudden, this Mikal Bridges, Cam Thomas, and we talked about this going back to the start of the season. Can these guys function together? How do you create the most value? Well, now that it's clear, the most value is when these guys are on the court together, along with some of these other shooters. In a second here, I have one more stat out of this game that I think we want to touch on, as well as taking a look at the bench and noting how important this game was given the upcoming schedule we're going to see as we get into the middle portion of this week. We'll dive into that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. No better time to get out on the action on FanDuel. New customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That means if you put a bet down on the money line against, like, let's say the Nets over, I don't know, pick a random team, the Magic on Saturday night, you would have walked away with $150 in bonus bets because the Nets won that game. That's just all you're looking for, your team to win with those money line bets. Grab the $150 in bonus bets. And by the way, it's not just money line stuff on FanDuel. They get the spreads, the player props, over, under, so much more. Get in on the action now. Go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. Tip off this NBA season. FanDuel, official partner of the NBA.
So as we tie a bow, not only on the weekend, but also the weekend win for the Brooklyn Nets, 129-101 over the Orlando Magic. One other note here, just want to go to the top level before we hit the bench. Mikal Bridges, the other big part of this, you mentioned about attacking at the basket way more. 18 free throw attempts in that game, 15 knocked down. 18 is the most in his career by far. Go back to last year, he had 13 for the Brooklyn Nets against Utah. That's the closest he came. And no, he's not going to be a guy that takes 18 trips to the line. But him getting into that facet of his game more because he has Cam Thomas with him is another dynamic that you hopefully see carry forward here. The other thing, if I just want to go high level for a second, maybe before we talk about upcoming schedule, is Royce O'Neal gave you 26 minutes of very quiet basketball, but still plus 24. So he's on the floor for some success there, but also 24 minutes from Day'Ron Sharpe and then Dennis Smith Jr. Getting back into the swing of things. Like, again, you mentioned this in the last couple of games, regardless of some injuries coming up. Vaughn keeps the bench and rotation really tight. And while the box score doesn't say a lot for most of these guys, though 5 of 10 for Dennis Smith Jr., I still think that their performance matter in a game like this. It kind of matters that Day'Ron Sharpe is seeing 20-plus minutes and you're not going ultra short. You have a role and you try to serve the needs of the team when you come in there.
Yeah, Claxton had foul trouble, so that led to more sharp minutes. We know Lonnie Walker was out, and DSJ came back and played instantly. Came up hugely impactful, by the way. I mean, probably just understated this, but 10 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists from Dennis Smith Jr. That's like probably his best game as a net.
Out assisting Cam Thomas coming off the bench and
led the team in rebounds. Like 11 rebounds was the team high. Just a crazy great per minute game from him. Even just from a fantasy perspective, it's just like sort of out of the box for him. And it's funny too, because when you look at this lineup sort of holistically, so you add in Sharp, we obviously know he's a great rebounder. DSJ, I mean, not like an amazing rebounder, but has been able to do it, especially considering like sort of how like his size. Mm-hmm. It is funny about how the gang rebounding, how this team is all sort of bought into different principles here, because the bench showed it off in a big way. Like I said, like DSJ 11 rebounds, Sharp had 6, Wofford had 4 in 7 minutes. Royce O'Neal had 6 rebounds.
27 rebounds.
A big reason. Well, there's a big reason they out rebounded the Magic 57-36, right? Yep. Like just because everyone sort of got in the action. Really, everyone that played had 4 rebounds or more. That's which is impressive, right? Like that's an impressive sort of overall feat. Right now, the Nets number 1 in the league in a rebounding rate, 48.2. Like with a team that has been without Ben Simmons for a long time, right? Like is playing at times some smaller guards, but it's like kind of incredible sort of what they did. There's like they got crushed in these areas last year, and it's become sort of a team attack. So I know you were mentioning the bench, but I think it was just wanted to kind of compile the bench together to say that this group was really high energy, really like the bench has been able to maintain stuff all season long. Like this is one of the main reasons that the team has been able to deal with so many injuries, is that kind of everyone that's coming off the bench has played well. Whoever has come in off the bench on the Nets this season has ended up playing well. I think like really to a man. And last night, it kind of gets brushed to the side because Mikal had such a huge game and Cam Thomas is starting, and those end up being sort of the big stories around this team. But again, like a consistent game by game thing, as anyone who comes in, they just pushed all the right buttons and they've just done all the right things. So I guess we kind of passed over it, or you didn't. I mean, you brought it up, but it was just one of these like just team effort kind of stuff. When you look at this box score, when you just watched it was sort of happening in real time, it's like, oh yeah, this is the other reason they've been good. It's like you don't these guys coming in.
Yeah, you don't get to these team rebound numbers without the bench guys being a critical part of it, right? You can have
11 rebounds from Dennis Smith Jr. 11 rebounds to Dennis Smith Jr. I'm not going to look. I don't even have to look this up. I'm sure this is his best ever in 21 minutes. Like I don't even have to look back or query this, because, and not to say that's going to happen. Here's the thing: it's not going to happen every night. But what they seem to have every night is something like this happen from a random guy, right? Like this has been a consistent theme. 2 games ago, is like Royce O'Neal becomes prime Steph Curry and shoots every 3-pointer. Or like 3 games ago, he shoots all the 3-pointers. Lonnie Walker was the leader in net rating for a while in the team, right? He's like, I think Dorian Sharp's just played good, consistent bench minutes all season long. Has probably been underrated how good of a job he's done. Each one, like there's all these little stories. It's never one guy the whole time, so it never becomes a story. But when you go back and tell the whole story, it's like, oh, it's everybody.
Yeah.
Like it turns out it's everybody that's chipped in on this.
By the way, this is a really special moment for me because I don't always handle in-show queries as well as I'd like to. Usually something happens with my fat fingers and the search just doesn't go out the right way. Dennis Smith Jr., that is his second most rebounds of his career in a single game. Detroit in 2021, he had 12 rebounds over 27 minutes. Orlando, 11 rebounds and just 21. Far and away his highest rebound total over that minute basis, because everything else is 28, 31 and beyond in terms of minutes. So Dennis Smith Jr. doing it in a really impressive way, especially if you go and do the measurables, right? It's not like we're talking about Dorian Sharp having a big rebounding night. This is the gang mentality. And the idea, because it's the same thing they talked about last year, everyone's got to get in on it. But something from last year coming into this year was like, no, everybody has to get in on it. And they all seem to get the message in a different way. Last thing for me before we get out the door here on this one, I mentioned about this being an important win. And I do want to ask the question if, like, does this flip it? You said it at the top. It's not as bad as the one loss or as great as this one victory. But boy, did you need this victory coming off of that loss to Charlotte. And with just 2 games this week, Wednesday night against Atlanta in Atlanta, and then home on December 8th before they head out west, you can now look at both those games and maybe do a little bit of, hey, remember that back-to-back where we should have taken care of Atlanta and we didn't? Let's get right on that. Take care of Washington and all of a sudden you go out west with a 12-9 record, right? Like this game against Orlando mattered, and this week really matters. I like that this team needs these kind of momentum pushes every 3 to 4 games to make sure they feel like they're staying a little bit ahead of schedule.
Well, there's some world where the Hornets game, as bad as it was a wake-up call to say, like, we're not good enough. We're not good enough to sleepwalk against anybody, right? Like, we cannot just we're not good enough to just show up, roll the balls out, and see what happens. Like, we just don't have enough talent. Like, we just can't. They don't have enough talent. Now, most teams really can't get away with that. But if you throw Jokic or Giannis or Embiid or some of these guys on the court, right?
90% of your roster can sleepwalk as long as that one guy does his job.
Yeah, you have a level that like you can you have a gear that you can probably get up to, right? The Nets just don't have that. So I do wonder, as bad as that Hornets loss was, if that is like a little bit of a look in the mirror moment to say, hey, that was super embarrassing. That was at home. Yep. That team did not have LaMelo Ball. That team didn't have their first round draft pick. Bryce McGowan's looked like an all-star, right? Like Terry Rozier looked like he should be all NBA by the time it's all over. And all of a sudden, we lost to a team that's headed right down the drain. And so, yeah, it sucks in the moment, but clearly against Orlando, again, scheduling luck, Orlando traveling, back-to-back, whatever, they came out and they rolled it right from the beginning. They had their foot on the gas right from the start, where it was kind of clear that whatever message had been received, at least for that game, that they are just not good enough to sleepwalk through this stuff. Because definitely the Hornets game had a sleepwalk. It was like, you kind of get the sense of like, we'll take care of this. Yeah. Like, it's the Hornets, we got this. And they just never did. Like, the Hornets never missed. and so as bad as it was, I hope that they can at least hopefully the positive to take away is they cannot do that again. That cannot happen again. They're not good enough. And if the Magic game was any sort of, light post, like light shining down and say, hey, like this is the version that we need to play like every night. If we play like this every night, we probably can beat most teams on a given night, right? Yeah, like I think they probably have that in them.
Yeah, just enough in that Charlotte game in terms of those little bullet points. Who's not playing?
Well, can I say one thing about that too? Sorry, I know I went on long, but one more thing about Charlotte, because I did podcasts after the game. If you looked at just their shooting splits, Charlotte's, their shooting splits were like 50, 58, 100, right? Like you can't shoot better than that. It's unbelievable.
Average for him,
if you only looked at those shooting splits and you didn't know anything else, you'd be like, the Nets lost by 50. Like, how could they not? Like, how could they not? The team literally didn't miss. They lost by 2. They lost by 1 on a buzzer beater that missed.
And you know what? I'll put it this way. Sorry, I'll cut you cutting me off.
Yeah.
I would say no, but I would say that, like, to your point of was it a wake up call? It's almost a good thing. Yeah. Now, again, with no ball on certain players, whatever, you'd say you should have beaten them by a lot anyway. But you could also very easily go into the locker room and go, listen, guys, 50-50, what are we talking about? You know what I mean? No one's going to run that hot. Let's just get to the next game. Instead, Vaughn said this in his post game as well. He's like, yeah, effort wasn't good enough. And that's what the cornerstone of this team is: effort. We're going to out grind, out hustle you. And if we don't do it from tip number 1, then there's a really good chance that a team can start to run hot, and there's no getting back from that, right? And that's the big carryover here.
And that's exactly what happened. You could feel it. There was like, we're making everything. There was other feel. I usually don't like to buy into narratives like that because I kind of find them silly, but it actually did have the feeling of, oh, we're all making. It's like, when you're piling on hits again, everyone's hitting, like we're batting around, boys, because we're getting to this.
Even the pitcher's getting a couple of knocks there at the end of the game.
It felt like that kind of game. All right, we're going to get out of here. We're going to be back again. Another episode coming this week. We got a couple of cool things on tap. One, not so great. We're going to give a Ben Simmons update here. And the Ben Simmons news is not amazing. And so we'll dedicate an episode to the Ben Simmons stuff. So that'll be coming up next on the feed. So keep an eye out for that one. I got a special guest coming this week talking Nets basketball as well. Excited for that. Also coming up in the meantime, make sure you're subscribed to YouTube, Locked On Nets. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. iTunes, Spotify, wherever. Make sure you join us over on Subtext. Got a bunch of new followers over there on Subtext too. So keep the conversation going. Join subtext.com/LockedOnNets. Go do all those things and help us out.
When someone comes to you with big dreams, don't be too quick to belittle their ambition, because inspiring and helping them in a way that you can reminds you that the beautiful butterfly was once a caterpillar. Rita Zahara.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.